The congressional hearing room fell silent as former Attorney General Bill Barr leaned into his microphone, his face red with indignation. "Representative Crockett, what you just said is a complete fabrication," he declared, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You are lying to the American people, and I will not sit here and allow it." But Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman from Texas, didn't even flinch. Instead, a small smile played at the corner of her lips as she reached for a manila folder that had been sitting quietly on her desk throughout the hearing. What happened in the next 30 seconds would send shockwaves through Washington and leave one of the most powerful figures in recent American politics completely speechless. This wasn't just another congressional hearing. This was the moment a 42-year-old freshman representative was about to expose decades of carefully hidden truths that Bill Barr thought would never see the light of day. The evidence she was about to reveal wouldn't just challenge his testimony, it would destroy his entire legacy. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single moment of these game-changing political showdowns. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, and let's get into the story that has Washington insiders calling this the most devastating takedown in congressional history. William Pelham Barr stood as a titan of the Washington establishment. At 73 years old, he had served as Attorney General not once, but twice under both George H.W. Bush and Donald Trump. His reputation was that of a formidable legal mind, a master of constitutional interpretation, and someone who had navigated the treacherous waters of Washington politics for over 4 decades. Yale-educated, with a resume that read like a who's who of conservative legal circles, Barr had faced down senators, representatives, and special counsels. He was known for his unflappable demeanor, his ability to deflect tough questions with legal jargon, and his fierce loyalty to executive power. Standing across from him in this David vs. Goliath matchup was Jasmine Crockett, a relative newcomer to the national stage but already making waves in Congress. At 42, she brought a different kind of energy to Washington, one forged in the courtrooms of Texas as a civil rights attorney and public defender. Unlike many of her colleagues who came from political dynasties or Ivy League backgrounds, Crockett had built her reputation defending those who couldn't afford justice. She knew what it was like to fight against a system designed to protect the powerful. And she had spent years perfecting the art of using evidence to demolish seemingly untouchable opponents. This wasn't just about two people sparring in a hearing room. This confrontation represented something much bigger. A clash between the old guard of Washington and a new generation demanding accountability. The hearing was ostensibly about examining the Justice Department's handling of investigations during the Trump administration, but everyone in that room knew it was really about something else. The truth about what really happened behind closed doors during some of the most controversial moments in recent American history. For Barr, this hearing was supposed to be a victory lap, a chance to rehabilitate his image after the chaos of the Trump years. He had come prepared with carefully crafted answers, expecting the usual partisan theater, where Republicans would praise him and Democrats would attack him along predictable lines. What he didn't expect was for someone to have done their homework, really done their homework, and uncovered documents that were supposed to have been buried forever. For Crockett, this was her moment to prove that she wasn't just another freshman representative who could be intimidated by Washington's power players. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working with her staff late into the night, following paper trails that others had abandoned, and building a case that would have made her proud as a prosecutor. She knew that taking on someone like Barr meant risking her political future. The establishment didn't take kindly to those who embarrassed its members, but she also knew that sometimes the truth was worth that risk. The hearing room was packed with reporters, cameras, and political operatives from both parties. C-SPAN's cameras rolled, capturing every moment for history. Social media was already buzzing with anticipation, with hashtags like BR Hearing and Crockett BV Spar beginning to trend. Everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen, but nobody could have predicted just how explosive the next few hours would be. The hearing had been proceeding relatively smoothly for the first hour, Barr had deflected questions from several committee members with his trademark combination of legal expertise and selective memory. "I don't recall that specific conversation," had become his refrain, delivered with just enough gravitas to sound believable while avoiding any real accountability. Then it was Crockett's turn to question. She adjusted her microphone, took a sip of water, and looked directly at Barr with an intensity that made several people in the gallery lean forward. "Mr. Barr," she began, her voice clear and steady, "in your previous testimony to this committee, you stated that you had no knowledge of any pressure being applied to prosecutors in the Roger Stone case. Is that still your position?" Barr shifted slightly in his seat, his expression unchanged. "Representative, as I've stated multiple times, the decisions made in that case were based purely on prosecutorial discretion and the pursuit of justice." "That's interesting," Crockett replied, pulling out a document from her folder, "because I have here an email dated February 11, 2020 from the lead prosecutor in the Stone case. Would you like me to read what it says?" The color began to drain from Barr's face, but he maintained his composure. "I'm not aware of what email you're referring to, Representative. There are many communications during that time." Crockett continued, her voice gaining strength. "This email, Mr. Barr, states, and I quote, 'The AG's office has made it clear that the sentencing recommendation needs to be reduced. This is coming directly from the top. Does that refresh your memory?'" Barr leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Representative, you're taking things out of context. The Justice Department regularly reviews sentencing recommendations." "Out of context?" Crockett interrupted, something flashing in her eyes. "Mr. Barr, 4 career prosecutors withdrew from that case. 4. These weren't political appointees. These were career professionals who had served under multiple administrations. Are you telling this committee that their withdrawals were just a coincidence?" The room had gone completely quiet, except for the sound of cameras clicking. Every eye was on Barr, waiting for his response. He took a breath, his legal mind clearly working to find an escape route. "Representative Crockett, I understand you're new to Congress, but these types of inflammatory accusations without proper foundation..." "Inflammatory?" Crockett's voice rose slightly. "Mr. Barr, I'm not making accusations. I'm reading from documents that your former colleagues provided to this committee." If With a degree of irony, Crockett said, "Are you calling them liars?" This was when Barr made his fatal mistake. Perhaps it was frustration, perhaps it was arrogance, or perhaps it was simply that he had been in power so long that he had forgotten what it was like to be genuinely challenged. Whatever the reason, he leaned into his microphone and spoke the words that would seal his fate. "Representative Crockett, what you're doing here is exactly what I'd expect from someone with your limited experience in these matters. You're lying. You're fabricating evidence to score political points, and frankly, it's beneath the dignity of this institution." The gasps from the gallery were audible. Several Democratic members of the committee looked shocked, while Republicans shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The chairman raised his gavel, but before he could speak, Crockett held up her hand. "Mr. Barr," she said, her voice now deadly calm, "did you just accuse me of lying? Did you just suggest that I would fabricate evidence?" Barr, perhaps realizing he had gone too far, but unable to back down, doubled down. "I'm stating that what you're presenting is a misrepresentation of facts, and yes, I believe you know it's a misrepresentation. If that makes you a liar, then so be it." The room erupted. The chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. But through it all, Crockett sat perfectly still, that small smile returning to her face. She reached for another folder, this one thicker than the first, and when she opened it, several committee members could see it was filled with what appeared to be official Justice Department documents, complete with stamps and signatures. "Mr. Ernbach." Who'd senator with the athlete eye? "Chairman," Crockett said, raising her voice just enough to be heard over the chaos, "I'd like to request a brief recess. It seems Mr. Barr needs a moment to reconsider his accusation, especially once he sees what I'm about to present to this committee." The chairman, a veteran Democrat who had seen his share of political theater, recognized the moment for what it was. "The committee will take a 15-minute recess," he announced, banging his gavel once more. As people began to stand and stretch, the real action was happening at the witness table. Barr's attorney had rushed over, whispering urgently in his ear. Several Republican committee members had also gathered around, their faces showing concern. On the other side of the room, Crockett was surrounded by her Democratic colleagues. But she wasn't celebrating. Instead, she was methodically organizing her documents, preparing for what everyone now knew would be a devastating second act. The media section was in overdrive. Brzozowska was known as a high-level magician, which reporters were frantically typing on their phones, sending out alerts and updates. Breaking! Brock accuses Rep. Crockett of lying in heated exchange flashed across news websites. Social media exploded with reactions, with Barr meltdown and Crockett has receipts beginning to trend. Cable news networks cut into their regular programming to show clips of the confrontation. But perhaps the most telling sign of what was to come was the behavior of Barr himself. The man who had walked into the hearing room with supreme confidence now sat hunched over the witness table, reading through notes with his attorney. His face, which had been red with indignation just minutes before, was now pale. Several times he could be seen shaking his head, as if in disbelief. Meanwhile, Crockett stood by the window, looking out at the Washington Monument in the distance. An aide approached her with a phone, apparently showing her something on the screen. She nodded, said a few words, and then returned to organizing her documents. There was no celebration, no gloating, just the focused preparation of someone who knew they were about to change history. As the recess continued, whispers began to circulate through the hearing room. Reporters who had been covering Washington for decades were comparing notes, trying to figure out what Crockett might have. The general consensus was that she had something significant, but what? "I heard she got documents from a whistleblower," one reporter whispered to another. "No, my source says it's emails that were supposed to have been deleted," another replied. "Whatever it is, look at Barr. I've never seen him like this," a third added. Indeed, Barr's transformation was remarkable. The man who had sparred with Robert Mueller, who had weathered intense criticism over his handling of the Mueller report, who had stood firm against accusations of politicizing the Justice Department, now looked genuinely worried. Several times he could be seen pulling out his phone, apparently trying to reach someone, but each time he would put it away without making a call. The Republican committee members were also showing signs of concern. Several could be seen having hushed conversations, with lots of concerned glances toward both Barr and Crockett. One senior Republican was overheard saying, "We need to know what she has before this continues." But Crockett wasn't sharing her cards with anyone. She sat at her desk, calm and composed, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. As when other Democrats tried to approach her, she would politely but firmly indicate that she needed to focus. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let anything distract her from what was about to come. When Chairman Johnson gavelled the hearing back to order, the atmosphere in the room had fundamentally changed. What had started as a routine oversight hearing had transformed into must-see political theater. Every major news network was now carrying the hearing live, with breaking news banners scrolling across the bottom of screens nationwide. "Mr. Barr," Crockett began, her voice carrying a different quality now, not aggressive, but confident, like a prosecutor who knows they have already won the case. "Before the break, you accused me of lying and fabricating evidence. I want to give you one opportunity to retract that statement." Barr had clearly been coached during the break. His response was more measured, though his jaw remained tight. "Representative, I stand by my assertion that your characterization of events is inaccurate and misleading." Crockett nodded slowly. "Very well. Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter into the record a series of documents that I believe will clarify exactly who is being inaccurate and misleading in this hearing." She lifted the thick folder, and the sound of cameras clicking filled the room like rainfall. "Let's start with this," Crockett said, pulling out a document and placing it on the desk in front of her. "This is a memo dated January 30, 2020, from your personal files, Mr. Barr. A memo that, according to Justice Department procedures, should have been preserved, but somehow never made it into the official record. Would you like me to read it to the committee? Barr's attorney immediately objected. Mr. Chairman, we haven't had the opportunity to review these alleged documents. Oh, Lich? Crockett interjected. Mr. Chairman, these documents were obtained through proper FOIA requests and whistleblower disclosures. They are authenticated with Mr. Barr's own signature. Unless Mr. Barr is now claiming he didn't sign his own memos? The chairman looked at Barr. Mr. Barr, are you disputing the authenticity of your signature? Barr was trapped, and everyone in the room knew it. If he disputed the signature, he would be opening himself up to potential forensic examination that could prove him wrong. If he didn't dispute it, he was confirming the document was real. I would need to see the document in question, Barr said carefully. Crockett smiled. Of course. She had an aide deliver a copy to Barr's table. The entire room watched as Barr examined the document, his face growing paler with each passing second. Well, Mr. Barr reviews that, Crockett continued. Let me tell the American people what this document says. In his own handwriting, Mr. Barr wrote, spoke with POTUS about Stone sentencing. He wants it handled delicately. Need to find a way to reduce without appearing to intervene directly. The room erupted. Committee members were talking over each other. Reporters were shouting questions, and the chairman was banging his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Through it all, Barr sat frozen, the document still in his hands. But wait, Crockett said, raising her voice above the chaos. There's more. Over the next 10 minutes, Crockett methodically presented document after document, each one more damaging than the last. A text message exchange between Barr and a senior White House official discussing how to manage the narrative around the Mueller report before it was released. An email where Barr explicitly instructed subordinates to find ways to support the president's positions on various investigations. A digital recording, yes, a recording, of a phone call where Barr could be heard saying, I don't care what the career prosecutors think, this is what needs to happen. With each revelation, Barr seemed to shrink further into his chair. His attorney had stopped objecting, apparently realizing that every objection only drew more attention to the devastating evidence being presented. Mr. Barr, Crockett said, her voice now sharp as a blade, you sat there and called me a liar. You accused me of fabricating evidence. But every single document I've presented today has your signature, your voice, or your explicit authorization. So I ask you again, who exactly is lying to the American people? Barr finally found his voice, though it lacked the authority it had carried just an hour earlier. Representative, these documents are being taken completely out of context. The president has the constitutional authority to... What, Mr. Barr? Crockett interrupted. To interfere in criminal prosecutions of his friends. To use the Justice Department as his personal law firm. Because that's what these documents show. And you know what's most interesting about these documents, Mr. Barr? She paused, letting the tension build. They were all created after you testified to Congress that no such interference ever occurred. Which means you didn't just lie to Congress once. You lied repeatedly, under oath, while serving as the nation's top law enforcement officer. But Crockett wasn't done. She had saved the most devastating evidence for last. Mr. Chairman, I have one final document to present. This one is particularly interesting because it's not from Mr. Barr's time as Attorney General under President Trump. This one goes back to his first tenure as Attorney General under President Bush. Barr's head snapped up, genuine surprise flickering across his face for the first time. You see, Crockett continued, Mr. Barr has a pattern. This document from 1992 shows him engaging in exactly the same behavior. Political interference in prosecutions, misleading Congress, and then covering it up. The only difference is that back then, we didn't have emails and text messages to prove it. We just had good old-fashioned memos like this one where Barr wrote, Congress doesn't need to know everything we do. Executive privilege covers a multitude of sins. She looked directly at Barr. A multitude of sins, Mr. Barr. Your words, not mine. What happened next was something that veteran Washington observers would talk about for years. William Barr, the man who had weathered every political storm, who had faced down special counsels and hostile senators, who had built a reputation as an unflappable defender of executive power, simply broke. He removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and when he looked up again, something had changed. The defiance was gone, replaced by what looked remarkably like defeat. "Representative Crockett?" he began, his voice barely above a whisper, causing everyone to lean in to hear. I would like to consult with my counsel." "Of course, Mr. Barr," Crockett replied, her voice now surprisingly gentle. "But before you do, I want you and everyone in this room to understand something. This isn't about partisan politics. This isn't about scoring points. This is about the integrity of our justice system. When the Attorney General of the United States lies to Congress, when he corrupts prosecutorial independence for political purposes, he doesn't just betray his oath. He betrays every American who believes in the rule of law." She began gathering her documents, stacking them neatly as she continued. "You called me a liar, Mr. Barr, but these documents, your documents, tell the real story. And that story is one of an attorney general who forgot that his loyalty was supposed to be to the Constitution, not to any president." As Barr huddled with his attorney, the hearing room buzzed with an energy that was part shock, part excitement, and part disbelief. Committee members from both parties were struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Several Republicans who had been prepared to defend Barr were now notably silent, while Democrats were trying not to appear too triumphant. The chairman, recognizing the historic nature of what had just occurred, made a decision. Given the serious nature of the evidence presented, this committee will need time to review these documents thoroughly. Mr. Barr, you remain under oath, and we will be calling you back for further testimony. This hearing is recessed until further notice." As the gavel came down, the room exploded into motion. Reporters rushed toward both Barr and Crockett, shouting questions. Barr's security detail quickly surrounded him, escorting him out through a side door, his attorney following close behind. The image of Barr fleeing the hearing room, because that's what it looked like, a flight, would become one of the defining images of the entire affair. Crockett, in contrast, remained at her seat for a moment, allowing herself a brief moment of satisfaction. When she finally stood to leave, she was immediately surrounded by colleagues and reporters. But she simply smiled and said, "The documents speak for themselves. The American people deserve the truth, and today they got it." Within seconds of the hearing's dramatic conclusion, social media went into overdrive. Crockett destroys Barr shot to the #1 trending topic worldwide. The clip of Barr calling Crockett a liar, followed by her systematic demolition of his credibility, was shared millions of times within the first hour. Twitter users were particularly creative with their responses. Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass in "Keep That Same Energy," one user wrote, garnering hundreds of thousands of likes. Barr really thought he could intimidate a black woman who was a public defender? "Sir, she's dealt with tougher opponents than you before her morning coffee," another viral tweet read. The memes came fast and furious. Someone created a video putting Crockett's takedown to dramatic music from a superhero movie. Another edited together every time Barr's expression changed as new evidence was presented, set to the sound of the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme. But beyond the humor and celebration from Crockett's supporters, there was also serious discussion about the implications of what had been revealed. Legal experts were appearing on every news channel, discussing the potential criminal implications of Barr's exposed lies to Congress. The phrase "perjury charges" was being thrown around with increasing frequency. Within hours of the hearing's conclusion, the political landscape in Washington had shifted dramatically. The first sign of how serious the situation had become came when 3 Republican senators who had previously defended Barr released statements distancing themselves from him. Senator Johnson, from Wisconsin, a longtime Barr ally, released a carefully worded statement. "The evidence presented today raises serious questions that demand answers. No one is above the law, regardless of their position or party affiliation." Even more telling was the silence from others who would normally rush to Barr's defense. The president's press secretary, when asked about the hearing, simply said, "We're reviewing the testimony and have no comment at this time." For an administration that typically fought back against every accusation, this silence was deafening. Meanwhile, Democratic leadership was trying to contain their excitement while pushing for immediate action. Speaker of the House Martinez held an emergency press conference announcing that the House would be opening a formal investigation into Barr's testimony with potential referrals to the Justice Department for perjury charges. "What we witnessed today was not just the exposure of lies," Martinez said, "but a pattern of corruption at the highest levels of our justice system. This cannot and will not be ignored." By the evening, the Justice Department found itself in an impossible position. The current Attorney General, Sandra Phillips, released a statement saying that the department would review the evidence presented and take appropriate action if warranted. But everyone understood the unprecedented nature of what that might mean: the Justice Department potentially prosecuting a former Attorney General for crimes committed while in office. Legal experts were having a field day analyzing the potential charges. On CNN, former federal prosecutor Jennifer Rodriguez laid out the case. Based on what Representative Crockett presented, you're looking at potential charges of perjury, obstruction of Congress, and possibly obstruction of justice. Each of these carries significant prison time. Fox News, which had initially tried to defend Barr, found itself in an awkward position as more conservative legal experts acknowledged the seriousness of the evidence. "Look, I've defended Bill Barr many times," said conservative commentator Mark Stevens. "But if these documents are authentic, and he didn't deny they were, then we have a serious problem." While Barr was huddled with his legal team, Jasmine Crockett was having the day of her political life. Her office was flooded with calls from constituents, fellow members of Congress, and media requests from around the world. The freshman representative, who some had dismissed as too inexperienced to take on Washington's power players, had just taken down one of the most formidable figures in modern American politics. That evening, she appeared on Rachel Maddow's show for an exclusive interview. Maddow, barely containing her excitement, asked the question everyone wanted to know: "How did you get these documents?" Crockett's response was measured and careful. "Rachel, there are a lot of good people in government who believe in the rule of law. When they see corruption and lies, they want the truth to come out. I simply provided a vehicle for that truth." "But you knew what you had when you walked into that hearing," Maddow pressed. "Why let him attack you first? Why let him call you a liar?" Crockett smiled. "Because I needed the American people to see who he really is. If I had just presented the documents, it would have been another partisan fight. But when he attacked me, when he called me a liar while he was the one who had been lying all along, that revealed his character in a way no document could." The interview was watched by millions, and Crockett's calm, methodical explanation of how she had built her case only enhanced her growing reputation. By the end of the night, she had gained over 1 million new followers on social media, and political observers were already speculating about her future. Senator Crockett? Attorney General Crockett? The possibilities seemed endless. Behind closed doors, Republican leadership was in crisis mode. Barr had been one of their most respected figures, someone they had held up as a paragon of conservative legal thinking. Now, they had to figure out how to distance themselves from him without admitting they had been wrong to defend him for so long. The most dramatic moment came when Senator Mitchell, the Republican leader in the Senate, was caught on a hot mic saying to a colleague, "We should have seen this coming. The signs were there, but we ignored them because he was on our team." And this accidental admission sent shockwaves through conservative media. Talk radio hosts who had spent years defending Barr were suddenly trying to explain why they hadn't questioned his obvious lies. "We trusted him," one prominent host said on air. "He betrayed that trust." But others in the conservative movement saw an opportunity. A group of younger Republicans released a statement calling for a new generation of conservative leadership that puts principles over personalities. They specifically praised Crockett for her commitment to transparency and accountability, values that should transcend party lines. 3 days after the hearing, another bombshell dropped. 2 whistleblowers from within the Justice Department came forward publicly, revealing they had been the sources of many of Crockett's documents. Both were career prosecutors who had served under multiple administrations. and their decision to go public added even more credibility to the evidence. In a joint interview with 60 Minutes, they explained their decision. "We took an oath to uphold the Constitution," one said, her voice shaking with emotion. "When we saw that oath being violated by the very person who was supposed to be protecting it, we had to act." The second whistleblower, a veteran prosecutor with 30 years of experience, was even more direct. Bill Barr corrupted the Department of Justice. He turned it into a political weapon. Representative Crockett gave us the opportunity to expose that corruption, and we took it. Their revelation sparked a new round of discussions about whistleblower protections and the importance of government accountability. It also led to more current Justice Department employees coming forward with their own stories of political interference during Barr's tenure. 5 days after the hearing, Barr finally emerged from his silence with an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal attempting to defend himself. The piece, titled "The Truth About My Service," was a lengthy attempt to contextualize the documents Crockett had presented. But the op-ed fell flat. Fact-checkers immediately found multiple false statements within it, and even conservative publications that might have been sympathetic were critical. The National Review wrote, "Barr's defense reads like the desperate justifications of a man who knows he's been caught. It's time for him to stop digging." More damaging was the response from his former colleagues. Several former Justice Department officials who had worked under Barr released their own statements contradicting his version of events. One particularly devastating response came from his former Deputy Attorney General, who wrote, "I can no longer remain silent." The documents Representative Crockett presented are accurate, and they represent only a fraction of the troubling behavior I witnessed. Beyond the immediate political and legal implications, the confrontation between Crockett and Barr had a significant cultural impact. It became a symbol of generational change, of new voices challenging old power structures, and of the importance of preparation and evidence in fighting corruption. Universities started using the hearing as a case study in their political science and law classes. The Crockett method became shorthand for thoroughly preparing for confrontations with powerful opponents. Young women, particularly young women of color, saw in Crockett an example of how to stand up to intimidation and false accusations. The phrase, "but she drops evidence that ends him," became a rallying cry on social media, used whenever someone was fact-checking false claims or exposing hypocrisy. T-shirts with Crockett's picture and the words, "I brought receipts," became bestsellers. As the weeks passed, the political implications of the hearing continued to ripple outward. The Justice Department announced a comprehensive review of all prosecutorial decisions made during Barr's tenure, potentially affecting dozens of cases. Several convictions that had been influenced by political pressure were being re-examined. Here, I'd expect CNN to win a Grammy, but some dealings with BSTs and agency SPs. More significantly, there was a bipartisan push for new legislation to protect the independence of the Justice Department. The Prosecutorial Independence Act, co-sponsored by Democrats and reform-minded Republicans, would make it a felony for any political appointee to interfere in specific prosecutorial decisions. Crockett herself became a leading voice in this reform movement. Her follow-up hearings on Justice Department independence drew massive audiences, and her ability to work with Republicans who genuinely wanted reform showed a political sophistication that belied her freshman status. While Crockett's star was rising, Barr's world was collapsing. His speaking engagements were canceled, his book deal was withdrawn, and several corporate boards asked him to resign. The man who had once commanded $50,000 0-cents speaking fees was now persona non grata in most circles. More personally painful was the reaction from the legal community he had been part of for decades. The Federalist Society, which had once celebrated him as a hero, quietly removed his name from their list of distinguished speakers. His portrait at the Justice Department, which traditionally would have been displayed prominently, was relegated to a back hallway. Former friends and colleagues distanced themselves. One former Supreme Court clerk who had worked with Barr told a reporter, "The Bill Barr exposed in that hearing is not the man I thought I knew. Either he changed, or I was blind to who he really was. Either way, it's heartbreaking." The hearing also had international implications. Foreign governments that had been skeptical of American claims about the rule of law saw the hearing as evidence that the system could still work. The European Union's Justice Commissioner released a statement praising the courage of Representative Crockett and the whistleblowers who ensured that truth prevailed over power. Conversely, authoritarian governments tried to use the scandal to their advantage. "See, American democracy is just as corrupt as any other system," wrote a Chinese state newspaper. But these attempts largely failed, as most international observers saw the exposure of Barr's lies as evidence that American democracy, while flawed, still had mechanisms for accountability. The hearing also forced a reckoning in the media. Many journalists who had taken Barr's statements at face value over the years had to grapple with their failure to dig deeper. "We gave him the benefit of the doubt when we shouldn't have," admitted one prominent political reporter on a journalism podcast. "Representative Crockett did the work we should have been doing." This led to a broader discussion about access journalism and the tendency of some reporters to avoid challenging powerful sources for fear of losing access. Several major newspapers announced new policies about fact-checking statements from government officials, regardless of their position or party. As her influence grew, Crockett was careful not to overplay her hand. She turned down most media requests, choosing her appearances carefully and always keeping the focus on reform rather than personal glory. When asked about her political ambitions, she consistently responded, "I'm focused on doing the job the people of Texas sent me here to do." But behind the scenes, she was building a powerful coalition for reform. She worked with Senator Warren on financial transparency legislation, with Representative Ocasio-Cortez on environmental justice issues, and even found common ground with some Republicans on government accountability measures. Her staff, which had initially been small and underfunded, was now flooded with resumes from top talent wanting to work for her. She was careful in her hiring, bringing in people with both idealism and practical experience. "We're not here to make noise," she told her team. "We're here to make change." 6 weeks after the hearing, the other shoe dropped. The Justice Department announced that it was opening a criminal investigation into William Barr's testimony to Congress. The appointment of a special prosecutor, former Judge Maria Santos, signaled how seriously the department was taking the matter. Santos was known for her meticulous approach and her immunity to political pressure. Her appointment was praised by both parties, with even some of Barr's former allies acknowledging that she would conduct a fair investigation. Barr's legal team immediately went into overdrive, hiring some of the best white-collar defense attorneys in the country. The man who had once overseen prosecutions was now preparing his own defense. The irony was lost on no one. The Barr-Crockett confrontation became a catalyst for a broader reform movement within government. Other congressional committees began taking a harder look at testimony from former officials, armed with the knowledge that documents and evidence could surface even years later. Whistleblower protections were strengthened, and new secure channels were created for government employees to report wrongdoing. The Crockett Protocols, as they became known informally, established new standards for document preservation and transparency. Young people, inspired by Crockett's example, began flooding into public service. Law school applications surged, with many applicants specifically citing the hearing as their inspiration. "She showed us that one person with courage and preparation can take on the entire system," wrote one applicant in their personal statement. A year after the hearing, its impact was still being felt. Barr was under indictment for perjury and obstruction of Congress, facing the possibility of significant prison time. His trial was scheduled to begin in 3 months, and legal experts predicted he would likely be convicted based on the evidence Crockett had presented. Crockett herself had become one of the most powerful members of Congress, despite still being in her first term. She chaired a new subcommittee on government accountability and had passed 3 major pieces of reform legislation. There was constant speculation about her running for Senate, or even president, though she continued to deflect such questions. On the anniversary of the hearing, she gave a speech on the House floor that was broadcast live on all major networks. A year ago, she began, "I was called a liar by someone who had built his career on lies. Today, we have shown that truth, when backed by evidence and courage, will always triumph over deception and intimidation. She continued, "But our work is not done. There are still those who believe they are above the law, who think their power protects them from accountability. To them, I say, we are watching, we are documenting, and we will hold you accountable. The American people deserve nothing less." The confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and William Barr would go down in history as one of the most dramatic and consequential congressional hearings of the 21st century. It changed how Congress conducted oversight, how the Justice Department operated, and how the American people viewed the possibility of holding powerful officials accountable. For Crockett, it was the beginning of what many predicted would be a historic political career. She had shown that preparation, courage, and an unwavering commitment to truth could overcome even the most entrenched power structures. Her example inspired a generation of young people to enter public service, believing they too could make a difference. For Barr, it was a complete fall from grace. The man who had once been considered one of the most powerful attorneys general in American history was now facing the possibility of dying in prison. His legacy, instead of being one of strong executive power and conservative legal theory, would forever be associated with corruption, lies, and the day a freshman congresswoman exposed him to the world. Even years later, the impact of that hearing continued to reverberate. The reforms it sparked had fundamentally changed how government operated. The culture of impunity that had allowed officials to lie to Congress without consequence was broken. The Crockett Standard became the benchmark for congressional oversight, requiring thorough preparation and documentary evidence. Law schools taught entire courses on the hearing, analyzing both the legal strategies and the political implications. The footage of Barr calling Crockett a liar, followed by her methodical destruction of his credibility, became one of the most studied moments in modern political history. Political scientists wrote papers on how the hearing had shifted power dynamics in Washington. The old boys network that had protected people like Barr for decades had been exposed and weakened. New voices, particularly women and people of color who had been marginalized in the past, were now at the center of power. Beyond all the political and legal implications, the hearing had shown something fundamental about human nature and the American system. It had shown that courage, when combined with preparation and evidence, could defeat arrogance and corruption. It had proven that no one, no matter how powerful, was above the law when citizens were willing to fight for accountability. Jasmine Crockett had walked into that hearing room as a freshman representative who many had underestimated. She walked out as a champion of justice, who had shown the entire country what was possible when someone refused to be intimidated. Her courage inspired countless others to stand up to corruption and lies in their own lives and communities. William Barr had walked into that hearing room, believing his power and reputation would protect him from any real accountability. He had left it exposed as a liar and a corrupt official who had betrayed his oath of office. His fall served as a warning to others who might be tempted to abuse their power. The truth has a way of coming out, and when it does, no amount of power or prestige can protect you from the consequences. The story of Bill Barr accusing Jasmine Crockett of lying, only to be destroyed by the evidence she presented, became more than just a political scandal. It became a morality tale for the modern age. A reminder that truth and justice, while sometimes delayed, cannot be permanently denied. For young people watching, it was proof that they could make a difference, that they didn't have to accept corruption and lies from those in power. For those in positions of authority, it was a warning that their actions would have consequences, that someone, somewhere, was keeping receipts. For the American democratic system, it was a moment of redemption, proof that the mechanisms of accountability, while sometimes slow and imperfect, still functioned when citizens had the courage to use them. The hearing had lasted only a few hours, but its impact would last for generations. It had shown that in the battle between truth and lies, between courage and intimidation, between evidence and empty accusations, truth backed by courage and evidence would always prevail. As we reflect on this historic confrontation, remember that democracy requires constant vigilance and courage from all of us. It requires people willing to stand up to power, to demand accountability, and to never accept lies no matter who tells them or how powerful they might be. The lesson of Jasmine Crockett versus Bill Barr is simple but profound. Prepare thoroughly, stand courageously, and never let anyone's position or power intimidate you from speaking truth. Because in the end, as Crockett proved that day, truth, backed by evidence, is the most powerful weapon of all. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more explosive political coverage and in-depth analysis of the moments that shape